Although, yes, just to reiterate what Holly was saying, is this is a 3-part series. So we're talking about communication in each stage of the disease. So the early stages today. Next Tuesday at 11, we'll talk about communication in the middle stages. Skip a week, which I believe it's election day. That's why we skipped. And then the following week, we'll talk about communication in the late stages and really understanding what changes are happening and how can we best manage those changes as caregivers. How can we better communicate with our loved ones in whatever stage of the disease they are in. So as we're talking about communication, we know that with dementia, there is a lot of brain changes that are happening from the early stages, and obviously as the disease progresses. There is a lot of evidence or studies shown that people have dementia several years before you start to see the early symptoms of it, especially Alzheimer's disease. They're able to see some of the damage that's happening, but our brains are so resilient. We have all of this, what do they call it, neuroplasticity and reserve that we can pull from. And then it's just really as the disease continues to progress, we start to see more and more of the damage and we see those symptoms happen. But we know that in all types of dementia, whether it's an Alzheimer's type dementia or a vascular dementia or Lewy body, that communication is going to change. From the early stages, there will be some changes all the way up to the late stages. And when we talk about communication, communication is extremely complex in the first place, whether you have a healthy brain or not. I mean, we all have misunderstandings and miscommunications all the time because there is more to communication than just the words that we're using, right? We use communication to express our needs, express our wants, our desires, share our knowledge, share our experiences and our feelings about things. I love this second bullet point here, especially for caregivers. Communication is more about listening than it is talking. And that might be something I need to practice more on a daily basis. But it involves, yes, it involves the spoken word, the words that we use, but also so much of it is nonverbal. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But everything that communication also involves, it involves the emotions of the person. Where are they at right now? And there's a thing called emotional contagion or mirroring, where really the mood of a person can influence the moods of other people around them. And we've all been there. So the complexity of communication is there, but then you add dementia on top of that, right? And all the changes that are happening to the brain and everything the brain needs to communicate, whether I'm giving you a message or I'm receiving a message. We've got to be able to see, we've got to hear the message, we've got to be able to process it, comprehend it, understand it. And then we got to think about a response. So I need to, what's an appropriate response? Can I think about it? Can I organize my thoughts in an appropriate manner or a logical manner? And then I've got to get to the words to my mouth to actually speak them. There's so much in many different areas of the brain involved. And depending on where the changes are happening, you can have a hiccup, especially in the early stages at any type of those or any area of function of those. In all areas, our factors are going to affect our communication, understanding of a message. Typical changes that happen in the early stages of dementia, communication changes, is that short-term memory, the forgetting recent events or recent conversations or recent instructions that maybe the doctor gave you, that you need to take this medication for the next several weeks, 3 times a day. Well, did I remember that? Much less did I comprehend what you said. Starting to misuse words, just starting to lose that vocabulary and substituting words and becoming more vague in their descriptions because they're losing actual vocabulary, nouns and proper names, but they're going to fill it in with other words that they may still have. Starting to have more difficulty organizing their thoughts into a logical sentence. Using, like I said, losing proper names of objects, but still want to communicate. So they are going to be, you know, well, it's the thing, you know, they describe themselves around it, you know, it's the thing that writes. If English is their second language, you will notice they're going to start to revert back to that first language. Not all the time, but just kind of start relying more on that first language, because that has to do with that language is in their long-term memory more than English, if it's their second language, is more in their shorter-term memory. Easily and often will start to lose their train of thought. You know, kind of a normal part of aging is I can lose my train of thought, or if I'm highly stressed out or tired, I can lose my train of thought too. But it's easy and it happens a lot. They're starting to tell you something and they've just lost it, and they're not going to be able to get it back either. This happened to me yesterday and it came back to me fairly quickly, but it's not going to come back to them. And also not having a really hard time keeping up with longer conversations, multiple conversations. You know, we're all like in social settings. I can have a conversation with you and you too, especially around a restaurant table or a kitchen table, right? Or quick subject changes, which we tend to do. You know, we're talking and having a nice conversation. It's like, oh yeah, I went to go vote this morning and the line was so long. You know, those quick conversations, their brain's just not going to be able to keep up with it as well. And they can easily become frustrated. They can start to rely more on visual gestures and cues to make sense out of things. And a visual gesture is us talking with our hands, us pointing at stuff. It's our body language, our facial expressions. So this is a tip we'll talk a little bit more about again here in a second, but how can I use more visual gestures in my communication to help them be successful? Much harder time processing complex instructions. Starting to repeat themselves. And this might be they're asking you the same question, they're telling you the same story, using the same words, familiar words over and over again. And then if there are some personality changes or other issues they're dealing with, like depression or frustration or anxiety, whether it's caused by disease or they have depression or they're just frustrated because they can't communicate like they used to, how that will affect their ability to effectively communicate in the moment. And we've all been there, have a hard time. I can't get the words out, or I'm not expressing myself the way I want to. And it can be very frustrating. And then it makes my communication even harder, or my need to express what I'm wanting to express even harder to get across. They can start to give signs of understanding and comprehension, but not really retaining or understanding what the information was. And this happens you know, if I'm giving an instruction and they might be smiling and nodding back at me and saying yes. And so we're getting that feedback that yes, they understand and we're on the same page and we're going to get up and we're going to go to the restroom before we leave for the restaurant. Yeah, okay. And they're smiling and nodding back to me and saying yes too. But then we get up and then they go elsewhere. And it's kind of like, you just communicated to me that you understood what I said. But a lot of it is that's that visual gesture they're relying on, and kind of responding and mirroring the emotions and mirroring what they see to be able to communicate. That makes sense. Their attention span is going to be so much shorter. They're focusing on one thing and for a long period of time, and concentrating on one thing for a period of time. A conversation is going to be so much harder for them. And you also might notice they're going to have good days and bad days. In just their cognition and being able to function on a daily basis, good days, bad days, but also they might be able to communicate better on one day and the next day it's not as well. And you can notice those changes from one day to the next in the early stages. They're also pretty good at hiding their changes that are happening or their deficits, and they can use humor to do that, or they can use anger, or they can put it back on you. Well, you should know what day it is, you big dummy. Why are you asking me? You know the answer to that. You know, they're deflecting. I don't want to tell you what that I'm having a deficit there. Or my mother, I would hear my mom say a handful of times to my dad, well, you forget just as much as I do, so this is no big deal. And he couldn't really dispute with her. You know, he's like, well, okay. But just kind of putting it back on them. Can also start to parrot or say and just kind of do what everybody else is around them doing. And you might see this, they're going to order the same thing that somebody right in front of them ordered, or say, yeah, that sounds good. I'll do that too. To hide those deficits or hide those changes. And starting to withdraw from conversations. Maybe they're not talking as much as they would. They may just not be interested in going to social situations or going to the dinner table with the whole family that's around there, or they're just sitting there and they're not saying much, and they might leave early too. But they also can be really good for short periods of time. And I hear this a lot, because they can go into a doctor's office, or your sibling comes over to visit for a short period of time. I'm so sorry. And they do well. So the doctor doesn't really notice anything. The sibling doesn't, well, they seem fine to me. Why are you complaining about it? For those short periods of time, they can do really well. You get them for a longer period of time, then you start to see some of that tiredness and some of those deficits creep in. Having a hard time in highly stimulated situations. So this is at a restaurant or somewhere there's a lot of people, a lot of noise. They're not going to be able to filter out that background noise like you and I can. And there's times there's a lot of stimulation happening around us, but our brain can focus on what's important or what we need it to focus on. Somebody that's having some dementia, the brain's not able to do that as well. It can't make sense of all that stimulation. That's noise, sensations, smells, what they're seeing, all that stuff. And then they can start to use those forbidden words. So as they're losing vocabulary and nouns and proper names and stuff, what they do have are forbidden words. And what happens is the temporal lobes house our language, and our left temporal lobe houses our language, that logical thought, being able to form a sentence, all that vocabulary is there. The right temporal lobe houses more rhythmic stuff, more music, but more rhythmic, like social chit chat, the hey, how are you? That stuff we've been doing all our lives. The weather's nice today, you look good, it's good to see you. That social chit chat, because there's a rhythm to it. They'll also keep the rhythm of speech, but they might not have the words. So you lose more on the left where you have your language, and you retain more on your right where you have more rhythm. What also happens to be on the right-hand side, because it's a special spot, is that those forbidden words, those cuss words, the sex talk, racial slurs, insults, mean language. And the reason it's stored on that right side is because it's special. It's not our everyday language that we use. It's stored in a special spot, and it happens to get stored on the right side where we retain everything longer. So what they are starting to use is what they have. They are using what they have. And that's where you start to see those forbidden words or those cuss words creep in. And as the disease progresses, you'll hear those words more often. It is not a reflection on their character. They're not trying to embarrass or potentially be abusive in any way. They're just using what they have, right? They also, even in the early stages, may not be aware of their deficits or their changes that are happening to them. So, because they can be saying something and it might not really make sense, and they might not be aware that it didn't make sense. And again, they can be confused in one moment and then not the next. What they will retain, however, and this is not an exhaustive list of what they will retain, but they will keep those long ago, long-term memories and emotional memories. So they'll rely on those to help them tell stories and share experiences and express themselves. Confabulation, and this is they're making something up to fill in what's missing. And it could make no sense. It could be completely false, but they're filling in what's missing. Whatever it's part of the story or part of their lives, they're just going to confabulate with that. They'll always be able to understand that nonverbal communication. What is your face saying? What is your body language saying? What's that tone of voice saying? Your gestures. They'll be able to pick up on that throughout the entire course of the disease. And generally, that's what they're going to respond to, not necessarily the words. Again, they have the singing and the rhythm, the swearing, the forbidden words, and that social chit chat. They'll still have that social chit chat, and they'll know what to do in those more learned situations, like a doctor's office setting. I know, and doctors, how's everything feeling? Oh, it's fine. Everything's fine. Yeah, I know I'm feeling okay. Because those are learned. We kind of learn to handle those situations in a certain way, right? Again, can do well for short periods of times. And given enough time, they can usually make their own decisions. We need to be better about giving them limited choices so they can still make their own decisions. You know, and at a restaurant, it's a good example. You give them a menu, and sometimes some of those menus are books. It's not just a menu, it's a book of things I got to flip through. And it's hard for me to make a decision on all of those things and be able to communicate, this is what I want. That can be too much and cause too much anxiety. So they're not being able to make that decision. So it might be, hey, are you more in a chicken mood? Or are you more in a salad mood? What do you? And then you can kind of narrow down their decisions from there. They're still making their decisions and still able to communicate what their wants are. We just got to help limit those for them. So a few what not to do's, and then we'll talk some more about some other tips. But we do not want to reason, argue, or confront. What's happening is we are used to relating to our loved one when they were healthy, quote unquote, or when their brain didn't have a lot of changes happening to them. And we could sometimes argue with them or reason stuff out with them. This is why you've got to take that pill. You need to take the pill every day, and really around the same time, you got to take it with medication because you don't feel good when you do it. And or confront them about something they said or didn't say or didn't do. What you're doing when somebody has a dementia diagnosis is you are not reasoning or confronting or arguing with your loved one anymore. You are reasoning and confronting and arguing with a disease. And unfortunately, we're not going to win. We're just not going to win. So we've got to find other ways to get around those and how to communicate a little bit better. We don't want to remind them that they forgot. You know, you remember, Mom, we've had this conversation 100 times already. I know we've had this conversation. Don't you remember? Or question their recent memory. Well, who did you visit with yesterday? Do you remember, or even showing them a photo, you remember who this is? Can you tell me who this is? It's like you're quizzing them or something. It's not a quiz. It's, you know, we're having a conversation here. And just flat out, if you can, go ahead and just get the word remember out of your vocabulary. Find different ways to get around that. And I have on here, don't take it personally. If anybody has mastered that, please let me know how you do that. Just put it on there though, right? We don't want to make assumptions about their ability to communicate or their ability to comprehend or understand what's going on. This disease does affect everybody so differently. And again, are they having a good day or are they having a not so good day, right? We don't want to exclude them from any conversations, especially if it's about their care or their future. They're still able to express and tell you what their wishes and wants are. We might need to choose a better time of the day to do it, and maybe have shorter conversations around that, but they have got to be involved in this. And also being able to talk about the emotions that can come along with this, if they're willing to talk about it or if they can talk about it. Speak directly to the person. They are still a person. They're still able to do most things. We just need to modify some things for them. Slow down and actively listen. And this is slowing down our how fast we speak, the pace that we speak at, but also just slow down all over. What your body language might be communicating something that's frustration or anxiety, and they're going to pick up on that. So just slow down and make sure you allow them plenty of time to process and comprehend. And this can get into that, if you ask them a question, can get into that awkward silence part. But remember, they're having a lot more barriers and roadblocks in their brain. It's not that they can't get there or respond to you. It's just going to take them longer. And we need to allow that time for them to be able to do that for themselves. And then asking what are the emotions or the feelings that they're trying to express. Because what is being said, the words that are being used may not be what the message is about, especially if they're agitated or upset about something. We want to get to what's that emotion they're expressing and help meet the needs from there and validate those emotions. You know, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be frustrated. And we're here to help and do this together. And how can we move forward? And try not to pull away, nurturing the relationship. I think in the early stages, the more support we are, how honest and open we are, Keeping things as normal as possible, having normal conversations with them. It doesn't always have to be about planning for the future or taking your medications or what you can't do. It needs to have normal conversations you've always had with them, and practice your relationship. Work on that relationship and that friendship you have with them, because that trustworthiness that you cultivate from the beginning is going to be crucial throughout the course of the disease. Using some simple verbal commands if we're trying to help them do something, break down larger activities into smaller steps. And this could be, setting the table, right? It could be that used to, hey, go set the table for 10. And they were able to do this, but now it might be, hey, can you put the forks and spoons out? Or can you put the plates out? And then they come back, all right, now let's do the forks and spoons. And just breaking it down in smaller steps. They can still do it. They can still do most things. We just need to help them along the way. Calm, reassuring voice. Watch our harsh tones and negative words that we may use too when we become frustrated and tired and sad as well. And identifying yourself or other people if they're unable to remember a name or quite place, how do I know them? And this isn't it's not a quiz again. It's not, hey, you remember Johnny, your best friend that you always play golf with, right? You know him. It's not anything kind of like that, but it's a, hey, Johnny's here. I'm so glad that you have such a great golf buddy. I gave you who he is and how you kind of know him. Y'all play golf together. It just helps them be successful. And I'm not quizzing them. You remember who this is, right? And what y'all do together. It's here he is, and y'all have a great time playing golf. If they are having a hard time finding the word or being able to express themselves, you'll know. I mean, you know your loved one better than anyone if they're willing for you to step in and kind of offer a word. Are you looking for this word, or do you mean this, or do you mean something else? And then I just want to talk about the repetition, because I kind of glazed over that. You might have a lot of repetition in the early stages with them asking you the same thing over and over, or fixating on one thing over and over again. If you have a structured daily routine that they're used to, this can help ease that, because they might be looking for I'm trying to remember what I'm supposed to be doing next. And they really don't remember that they just asked you that question. So you want to answer as if you've never been asked it before, and then redirect or distract as you needed, or as needed. And I would also suggest not to inform them of events or appointments or visitations or whatever until they occur. Because we might think, all right, so mom's got this doctor's appointment. It's coming up on Friday. I'm going to start telling about her now. I'm going to prep her now so she can remember, get her prepped for this. So I tell her about this appointment on Friday afternoon, and now she holds on to there's an appointment, but she doesn't know when or with whom or what she needs to bring. So it can cause anxiety and cause a lot more repetition and communication challenges for you. So you might just want to wait until Friday afternoon and say, hey, Mom, we're going to go grab lunch and go to the doctor. Real quick, just quick check-in, no big deal. So they're not having to fixate on all the time. So I mentioned that distraction and redirection. To distract, these are 4 of the best things you can distract or redirect them with. Music is huge, especially music from their time of their life. I believe Holly says between the age of 10 to 25, it's that music of their youth. Sweets is always going to work. And then pets, animals, and little kids. These are great ways to distract, redirect, and help ease any anxiety or frustration, or move them on from a repetitious question or story they're trying to tell you. And then I want to kind of end with this, focusing on the nonverbal communication. While somebody with dementia is processing the words that we're using, right, and it's taking them a little bit longer because of all the changes that are happening, what they're going to be able to do is pick up on your nonverbal communication. And that is, what is your body language, what is your facial expression, and what is your tone of voice. And they're going to react to how you communicate something while they're processing the what. They may not get the what, but they'll always be able to get the how you're communicating. So if I am communicating frustration and exhaustion, they'll pick up on that, and that's what they're going to respond to, or mirror, or communicate back to you. And you can see this chart here, the communication breakdown. And this is not, doesn't have anything to do specifically with dementia. This is communication in general, and our communication is 7% words, and the rest of it is our body language and our tone of voice. So really, I mean, the words we choose to use are important, but it's really how are we communicating, which is so important. And the earlier in the disease state you can understand how you communicate something or practice positive communication through nonverbal, the easier it's going to be, and it's going to be more a natural communication function for you going forward as the disease does progress and communication becomes harder and harder for them, and as you're going to have to help manage it a little bit better. So there's our information. I'm going to stop sharing and ask, what questions do we have, or comments or experiences that you have that you might want to share?
I have a question. And that is, sometimes what I've been doing, I think, might be counterproductive, because a lot of the things you're saying I do, but sometimes he wants to know what's happening in the day. So I'll make a list of what's happening in the day, including what time schedules are and what times I might be doing things away from him. And it's frustrating because that just tends to generate the same repetitive questions over and over, seriously. And while I think that that's something he needs, I'm not sure it's beneficial. Can you comment on that?
Are you writing it down on a sheet of paper and he can just refer to it each?
Yes.
In a pocket type thing? Mm-hmm. I don't see a problem in that. And I actually worked with a lady that's what they did. Families had to write it down, what was coming up the next day. Maybe just a couple of things, not the full schedule of the day, but there's just the highlights of the day. Or they put it on a large dry erase board. So where it's not, there's more of a visual cue. If it's like in a large area of the room, like on the refrigerator or something, I see that more, and I kind of know. Or if there was a general place you kept the calendar in the house, maybe putting it there, and where it's larger, instead of having to refer back, well, did you get your note? Read your note, read your note. Well, let's see what's on the note. And that might just be, that's what it is, because they truly don't remember. And there are some structural changes that are happening in the brain, and physically they can't remember that recent stuff, that working memory, what just happened. So you can have larger visual cues that can help, and just highlighting what's happening. And as the day goes on, scratch out what you've done. So now I'm not as confused. Oh, we've already done that. Okay, so now we're on to the next thing. It's not going to take away the keep asking type stuff, but it can maybe help. Does anybody else have another suggestion on that, or what they've done? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that, so mom has a caregiver that comes every day from 8:30 to 12:30 while I'm at work. And then I work all the way until 5 o'clock at night. But the caregiver leaves, and then mom takes a nap, and then her afternoon is kind of her time. And we don't have the schedule, but for 8:30 to 12:30, I don't have everything listed out. I mean, that caregiver knows the very first thing she's got to do is make sure that mom did eat her breakfast, because mom's right now independent and makes her own breakfast and eats it and takes her pills. So she knows that when she walks in the door, she's got to check that. So I don't have that on the list. That's something that they have to make sure that baseline is taken care of. But then the activity for their day, I've got a little whiteboard that's got 7 days on it, and it's got just enough, like you said, just enough of a blurb that every day mom goes to Dementia Friendly Fort Worth from 10:30 to 11 o'clock. So that's all the way across the board at 10:30, and she knows that to expect it. And then if we have a doctor's appointment, even though it's a couple of days out, on Thursday, she can see that she's going to miss the Dementia Friendly Fort Worth, and she's got a doctor's appointment, and I've got it there on the board for her. And I find that I don't cross it out. I keep it simple. I've got only like 4 items and from 8:30 to 12:30, and I only have that part planned. I don't have the rest of it. But if there's, like you were saying, Deborah, if there's a time when an afternoon when I know normally I wouldn't be there because I'm working or whatever, but I'm going to come down, I'm going to be with her, then I'll drop that down right in that space right below, just so that she knows that it's coming up, that there's going to be this little change. I think for me, and maybe it's where mom's at, mom likes to know what's coming up. She likes to know, are we doing, or if we are going to go somewhere, if I'm not going to be there, like you said, Deborah. I think those are important. Maybe it's a little too much, or maybe a whiteboard might be a little bit easier, that they can come and go and pass it, but they're not sitting there staring at it all day or anything.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and it's a lot of it is trying it out. Would a bigger board help? If you scratch or marking it out each day, would that help? Let's see how they respond to it. Did something make it worse, or did it make it a little bit better? You know.
And I will say, I did get those 3M stickies, the kind that you put the board on the wall that you can peel and then it doesn't ruin the wall. I got that because mom's right now is still temporarily at my house, and I knew my husband would be like, "Oh my gosh, we're not putting my whiteboards in our house for after mom's gone," you know. But I mean, there are some concerns. But those 3M sticky with the Velcro and stuff makes it really, really nice and easy to take care of. And then if you ever have to take it off the wall, then you just pull it right off, which is nice.
And there was a question in the chat, is aphasia part of this stage in some way? How do you decide what stage mom's in? And she has most of all ones mentioned today. Aphasia you can start to see, and aphasia is the inability to understand and speak language. It can also be or coincide with what type of dementia they have. The true aphasia really for a typical or a more common type of dementia happens more in the middle stages of the disease, it seems like. But it also depends on what, so individualistic, what part of the brain is having some changes for that particular person. Is where you can start to see aphasia for some people a little bit earlier on, because that part of the brain might be being attacked more than another part.
So I have a question, Jamie. So, as I've shared with you guys before, you and Holly and others, that mom's really, so mom lived in California. She moved here with me. She's lived here now over a year. And she just really doesn't talk to anybody that's not physically present with her. And even sometimes, of course, she's struggling with some of this stuff, even one-on-one with Roger and her caregiver and I, right? But I mean, absolutely refuses to take phone calls, to make phone calls. She doesn't like to get letters. She doesn't like to write letters. She doesn't want to Zoom. She doesn't, I mean, there's not a single one of her connections. I mean, I can understand about withdrawing from conversation, but it's so overwhelming that, I mean, her own daughter, my sister. What do you think? I mean, is there anything that you can recommend for me to help her with being able to keep her connections? I don't want to spend a lot of time myself. I've got enough, just my job, my mom, my husband, my life, but at the same, and I think it's okay. I think most of the family's starting to get it. It's going to be short, but it's just she won't even answer the phone.
And that might be she doesn't know how. It's not I don't want to, I just don't know how. And it could very well be I don't know how to answer the phone, or when I'm on the phone, I can't hear as well. I don't understand. It's too much for me. Mm-hmm. It's too overwhelming. So it could be that if you schedule a phone call and maybe you answer it, or you call your sister, right? And just have a real quick, hey, Sarah wants to say hi. and you hand her the phone and you're right there, or maybe you're on the other line, because it could be that she's afraid of making a mistake or not knowing what to do. So if you're right there, but you're on the other line too, that could help, because you're kind of the support. You could fill in for her if you needed to. You can try that.
Yeah.
And I would say people, yeah, it's going to be short for sure. And it might be that if they're sending letters or something like that, send some photos instead of a bunch of words, because she might not be able to read it. You know, it's just kind of what's preserved, what does she still have, and that's what we want to work with.
I understand what you're saying, and I agree that mom's struggling with conversations, keeping up with fast pace, switching quickly, knowing, even recognizing somebody's voice to knowing who they are is a little bit of a challenge for her. And so it takes her a minute when the phone call comes in. But I will say this, that if I pick up her phone and say, hey, she texted me, she really wants to talk to you, we're gonna call her, mom starts having a fit. I mean, so she knows that we're gonna have the conversation. She doesn't want to talk on the phone. I mean, she's actually communicating with me, no, don't, Kristen, I don't want to. And so I think you're right in terms of, I mean, even the Dementia Friendly Fort Worth, once we got it on her calendar, and she went every single day at this time. And she used to fight it every single day, but she knows now that that's going to happen. So maybe it's just sticking in on her board that this day, this time, we're going to call Shelly. We've got to talk to my sister. We got to talk to her once a week, and this is the day and time, and we're going to just do it. I don't know. Maybe I just knuckle up and do it. I do know the other day we got a letter from one of her friends, and I was reading it, and I was struggling. She was picking out words. She's like, no, this word. She knows her friend's writing better than I do. So that was kind of interesting. But it is a struggle for her to read. It is a struggle for her on some of that. I will encourage them with the photos. And also, I mean, my sister and several of her friends have Zoom now. It might just be easier for mom to see your face instead of talking to you on the phone. So I might look at doing something like that with them.
Yeah. Especially if she's already used to seeing Zoom on the TV. Like with Dementia Friendly Fort Worth, that might be a good alternative to a phone call. Well, I appreciate you all for sharing and asking questions. We are available, both Holly and I are always available. If you have a question, oh, I meant to ask that, or you just want to ask in private anyway, please feel free to email us or call us. You will get a copy of the slides and a recording, the link to the recording here, and our upcoming programs. We appreciate it, and we hopefully see you guys really soon, maybe on the support group tomorrow. Yeah. Kristen.
At the link, we're allowed to share that with others, like my sister and others that are in California, that if they want to learn a little bit more about what's going on with mom, that they can.
100%, yes, please share as much as you want. That's what this is for. So thank y'all so much.